All right. Well, thank you everybody for being here. I really appreciate you joining, taking the time out of your busy evening, wherever you are, or afternoon, depending on what time zone you're in. Thank you for that. Attending this very important meeting, which is talking about healing beyond trauma, right? Reclaiming your mind, body, and relationships. A transformation exploration of trauma's impact and the journey toward authentic healing for everyone. Okay. So again, thank you for being here. And I just like to always start with an important disclaimer. So by participating in this virtual event, you acknowledge that my positive psychology, transformational mindset, and integrated nutrition certifications are not to be construed as psychological counseling, therapy, or medical advice. My comments are backed by scientific evidence, life experience, and opinion. Individual results depend upon unique learning ability, motivation, commitment, and other factors. You agree that there are no guarantees as to specific outcomes or results from the information received through this event, okay? So what are we going to cover today? So today we're going to cover number one, understanding trauma's impact. So how does trauma rewire your brain and body, affecting everything from stress responses to your physical health? The types of manifestations, we want to recognize different forms of trauma and basically how they show up in daily life, relationships, and self-concept. Three, emotional expression barriers. We want to talk about or, learn about why many people men struggle to discuss emotions and trauma openly. There's only like two slides. And I basically just want to say with those two particular slides, I bring that up because, women are more expressive. We know that. And men tend to have the myths of masculinity. When I share a little bit of my story, you'll kind of understand that even though, the way that I was raised, I still got bit by some of these myths of masculinity, which made it harder for me when I was in relationships. With me, I'm heterosexual, so with women, it was a difficult situation because I was intimidated and there was things I needed to learn based on the fact that I had experienced trauma. So that's the reason why, and I think it's very beneficial for both men and women to really understand, and maybe it'll help women understand a little bit more about the struggles that also men go through. Not saying that women don't struggle within relation. I think women are more of the, let's say, victims from men when it comes to some of these things that men struggle with, lack of communication and aggressiveness and these things. So I felt it was important for me to add these two slides into this specific presentation. And four, we're going to talk about the healing pathways, evidence-based strategies from multiple disciplines to build resilience, improve communication, and reclaim authenticity. Okay. Just move this bar. Every time I let somebody in, the floating meeting control thing pops up again. So sorry about that. Okay. All right. So welcome to our journey together. So here we're navigating our own healing path. We're supporting a loved one or working as a helping professional. This presentation offers tools to transform your understanding of trauma and healing. Today, again, we're going to explore how trauma shapes our minds, bodies, and relationships, and most importantly, discover evidence-based pathways to move from merely surviving to generally thriving, right? Instead of just surviving in life, we want to learn to thrive. And the only way we could really do that is by dealing with this unresolved trauma. And it's very scary to do so. Okay. So we need to make sure that we are addressing that. Okay. And this space, I want to make sure that everybody understands that this space is of compassion, understanding, and empowerment. We want to respect everybody's privacy as well when we open up for questions and answers. We want or Q&A. I don't like the word. Why do I say it? It just sounds weird when I say questions and answers. Every insight shared today comes from both research and real human experiences. I'm going to share a little bit about my story before we begin. So that's me on the left there eating a piece of watermelon. And at that time, I think I was probably maybe like 4. So that was in 1974. So I was born February 17th, 1970. And I grew up in New Jersey, born in New Brunswick, St. Peter's Hospital. And, I have to say that probably our first traumatic experience that we experienced is actually coming out of our mother's womb, right? As soon as we're born into this world, one of the things that we have to deal with is trauma, like taking our first breath. Also, learning about, okay, as soon as we're born, we're starting to die. And that's a trauma in itself because a lot of people have a fear of death, right? So that could be traumatizing in its own little way. And we really don't and again, depending on what meaning you give to this life, I believe that we pick our destiny or our learning experience that we want to go through in this earth school. Some people may have their own meaning of what happens, why we're here. I tend to believe that, the experiences that I went through have shaped me and have made me who I am today. And so I was born into a situation up into the age of 4 that everything was normal. I was an only child. I was born at my mother and father. I'm Jewish descent. But when my mother, when my, and back in 1974, when my mother decided that she couldn't live a lie anymore, and she basically came out of the closet. And for those of you who might be a psychologist or therapist or in that field, or those who aren't, up until 1973 in the DSM, which is the book that houses all of the mental illnesses and conditions. If you were considered a homosexual, in that book, it said you were considered of having a mental illness. And in 1973, they removed that. And so my mom, being born in 1945, gay, couldn't live the lie anymore. So my life was kind of turned upside down as a result of, my mother basically coming out of the closet because there was some blowback as a result of that. My mom had a sister, and there was basically 3 cousins, and I was the baby of the family. And when my mother came out of the closet, they decided they didn't want to have anything to do with me anymore, well, do with us anymore, which was, my first, I guess, trauma where I had to experience abandonment. Now, at the age of 4, did I really understand that? Probably not. But still, between the ages of 0 and 7, if you know about how your neural pathways are created and how beliefs are created, you are a sponge between the ages of 0 and 7. And we're going to go over some of the things that, communication style and attachment theory of how that could really shape some of your beliefs, whether you feel you're good enough, what's wrong with me? I did something wrong. Why don't people like me? And my mother, as a result of living, not understanding, she never was really accepted throughout her life and still got married. My dad knew that she had these feelings, but married her anyway. My dad wasn't a very smart man, and he got remarried and had 2 more kids. And I had a stepbrother, and when I was 9, he moved to Florida. So I had to deal with another abandonment issue, which was an issue. And my mother, had to deal with a lot of physical abuse as a child. So, that's usually a pattern that if it isn't broken is carried into another, when you're older. And so I had to deal with a lot of physical abuse, pulling of the hair and, spankings with a belt. And that could cause a lot of shame and trauma. And then being, my mom was in a lesbian relationship, and my godmother had 2 other sons. We moved to a neighborhood that was more of a blue collar town. And so I was the only Jewish kid. And, my mother and my dad were short people. So my mom was 5 foot, my dad was 5'4". So 2 Chihuahuas don't make a Great Dane. So here I am, this short Jewish kid growing up in a blue collar town, and I was the only Jewish kid. And I had to experience a lot of anti-Semitism. People would spit in my hair, call me effing Jew boy. I would get into a lot of fights. My mom had to get somebody to protect me. It was a very contentious situation. And me being born in HSP, which if you don't know what an HSP is, a highly sensitive person, I felt everything. It was very difficult for me. I didn't understand why people didn't like me. I didn't understand why did I do something wrong? And so, when we go over this a little bit more, you're gonna get better understanding of how, the attachment theory, the communication style, and how these things between the ages of 0 and 7 can really shape your life. And also, trauma could affect you later on in life if you're an adult as well. But, this is just kind of my personal story and how I've overcome some of these things and how I felt growing up, excuse me, as a teenager. The one saving grace is that I was able to, at the age of 11, start lifting weights. And I played little league and wrestled, but I didn't realize at the time, that I was already practicing some somatic practices, because as we go over through the presentation, you're going to understand that with trauma, your body keeps the score. So thank God I was able to like lift weights and do that and still continue to do it today, because I think that was like my saving grace from not going crazy. So with that, that's just a little bit of my story of what I had to deal with growing up. And as I go through the different slides, I'm going to sprinkle in some more things about my story and how I transform some of these things. Okay. So let's keep going. So what is trauma? Okay. So trauma is a normal human response to abnormal circumstances. It does not discriminate and impacts millions globally, right? Doesn't care what sex you are, what nationality, what color, what sexual orientation. It doesn't matter, right? It basically is just very detrimental. And when faced with an event that is too much, too fast, or too sudden, our innate survival instincts activate, which is our fight, flight, freeze, and fawn. And, I like to say that my definition for trauma, which I came up with, is the enduring emotional reaction that often arises from experiencing a distressing event or from accumulated micro traumas, right? It could be something that is, we have to be careful when we throw around the word trauma. Okay. It could be other things that we have to, when we use the words, we got to be very careful, because some people could say like, "Oh, I'm depressed," when really they're just sad. There's a big difference between being really depressed and being sad. There's a big difference between like having like an extreme trauma compared to maybe like a micro trauma, or having something fall into a fear and anger, or some type of emotional response. But these traumas are perpetuated by deeply ingrained destructive beliefs stored in our subconscious and body, right? Influencing our thoughts, feelings, actions, and results every single day. Okay. And you could see on the left-hand side there, with our perception, right? Which is, we could see, we could hear, we could taste, we could smell, we could touch, right? We develop some of these beliefs, which influence our behaviors, and it's cultural as well, right? So again, like I explained earlier, how these different things when we're children could really cause us to, develop these programs that are very destructive, and insidious, to be honest with you. And to give you an example how this particular thing would work is, let's use an example. If you were young and you got bit by a dog, if you weren't desensitized, that all dogs aren't bad, you're going to develop the belief that all dogs are bad. So when you see a dog, the first thought is all dogs are bad. The feeling is, oh, I'm scared. The action is, I'm going to run away. The result is, I can never go over anybody's house that has a dog, right? So that's a trauma that's perpetuated every day and just keeps cycling and cycling and cycling until you come to a realization like, woo, I need to shift this belief. But again, it's stored in our subconscious, which can cause us to, fool ourselves. We don't, we just kind of live our lives through habits, which are made up of a cue, routine, and a reward. And we do the same routines, and we don't realize like those routines are probably not the best thing for us. And until we learn like what's going on and how it's connected to a certain belief or a thinking trap, different concepts that I'm talking about here that I teach, being a positive psychology practitioner, will never move forward. Okay. But behind all this is like the trauma we have to like address, or we can't move forward. Okay. So the neurobiology of trauma is three different things. The brain structure changes. Trauma alters the physical structure and function of the brain, particularly the amygdala, right? The amygdala is our fight, flight, and freeze, which is our fear center. Okay, we want to have the amygdala, right? Because if somebody holds a gun to our head, we should be fearful. That's normal. But again, sometimes when we have trauma, or when we experience trauma, we could be caught in fear all the time, which is bad, which is, kind of stuck in our sympathetic nervous state, uh, rather than our parasympathetic nervous state. Our hippocampus, which is in charge of our memory and processing, which takes care of that, could shrink. Our prefrontal cortex, which is really our logical thinking system, which is in the front of our head, is our rational thinking, and that could shrink as well, right? We're not thinking properly. New neural pathways form, creating automatic response patterns that bypass conscious thought. Okay. So when we create when they say neural pathways, okay, that's a thought. Okay. The best way that I could kind of describe this is when if you're in at work and your work has a security where every month or two they ask you to change your password. Okay. So you go in, you change your password, you go up, you get a cup of coffee, you come back. What do? You start typing in the old password, right? You're like, oh no, I did change the new one. Using deliberate practice over and over again, 2 weeks, you have shed, like you're slowly shedding that old neural pathway, which is the old password, but it's still there, it never goes away, but you're strengthening that new neural pathway, right? So when we go through a trauma or some type of experience, we're creating like these new neural pathways that, again, like I say, could become a habit. It could just kind of like, be masked by some of these beliefs that we have. It's like they get attached, and that's attached to an emotion, and then we get caught in a vicious cycle. Okay. So a new neural pathway is a thought. But the good news is that you create new neural pathways throughout your whole life. And the great news is that you could shed, or I should say, minimize those old ones, those old triggers, and create new ones by flipping beliefs. Okay. And that's the whole goal when it comes to trauma and using different tools in order to do that. Okay. So basically, new neural pathways form, creating automatic response patterns that bypass conscious thought, explain why trauma reactions feel beyond our control. Stress response system, the body's stress response system becomes chronically dysregulated, leading to a persistent state of hyperarousal, which is fight or flight, or hypoarousal, which is freeze and disconnect. So really like understanding brain physiology is really important. So if you understand like, oh, when I have like this fear response and it's my amygdala is being activated, I need to like do some breathing exercises, be able to practice the pause to try to go from sympathetic nervous state to parasympathetic nervous state, right? What those two things, parasympathetic and sympathetic nervous state, is part of your autonomic nervous system. And so when you learn about how you have vagus nerves that go from your brain to connects each organ, and that's, you have your autonomic nervous system, which controls, your fight, flight, and freeze, and how you could control with breathing and doing different things. It makes it a lot easier. So it's important to learn like your brain physiology. Okay. So hopefully that gives you kind of a little high level view of how your brain works. Okay. PTSD, when trauma gets stuck, right? So, if you're somebody who has experienced something, maybe, sexual abuse, or if you were a soldier and you had a PTSD there, different things like the stimula, like hearing, like for instance, let's just say a soldier comes home and he has PTSD or she has PTSD, and they go to a Fourth of July event, fireworks are going off. That could cause like a PTSD event, both from sight and sound. So again, like our perception can basically trigger again these pain bodies. I don't know if you've ever heard of Eckhart Tolle, but he calls like these triggers called pain bodies. That's what I like to call them, called pain bodies. So when you have PTSD, it means your body and brain remain stuck in survival mode, meaning that you're in what we talked about earlier, your amygdala, right? which is your sympathetic nervous system, where that controls where your heart starts beating fast. You start to sweat. You could even have some panic attacks. Your breathing increases. Your eyes get dilated. And just imagine if you're basically in this state all the time, it has major effects on your health, your heart health, a lot of different things. So, some of the core symptoms of PTSD can be intrusive experiences like flashbacks, vivid nightmares, hyperarousal, again, be constantly on edge, irritable, easily startled, struggling with sleep. You could be avoidance, actively trying to avoid reminders of the trauma. Could be use drugs, alcohol, people, places, things in order to avoid that. Negative shifts, persistent negative thoughts about oneself or the world, feelings of guilt, shame, detachment, or inability to experience any positive emotions. So if you have PTSD, it's very important to get help, right? And the good news is, based in green, the hope for healing, despite the profound impact on brain circuits where the amygdala, the fear center, becomes overactive, the prefrontal cortex underactive, which is your logical thinking system, and the hippocampus really is impaired. PTSD is not permanent, okay? With targeted tools like CBT and different tools that we're going to go over, ketamine, EMDR, there's a lot of different things that we could do to reverse this, no matter what age you are. So that's a very good thing. And so if you're one of these people who are experiencing PTSD, just know there's hope for you. You are not stuck, okay? Trauma lives in the body, right? This is something where the body keeps the score. So it's true, how many people I can't see the chat right now, but I'd love to know how many people right now are suffering from back issues. Either give me a thumbs up in the chat, okay? Or people who are raising their hands, that's fine. I could see those too. Or how many people are experiencing some type of pain? Maybe your back is tight, or you're having migraine headaches, or you're having some type of stomach issues, like you feel it in your gut. You always have like diarrhea, or you're having like IBS or irritable bowel. Well, a lot of this is stored trauma, okay? Because our body keeps the score, and it can profoundly impact well-being. And these are deeply rooted psychological responses to overwhelming stress, okay? So as a trauma expert, this person Bessel van der Kolk states, the body keeps the score. True healing requires integrating the body's experience to release past trauma and restore self-regulation and peace. Most important, self-regulation is really important, okay? Sorry. And somatic approaches are highly effective for healing, helping to release trapped energy and restore the nervous system's natural rhythm. Key modalities include body-based mindfulness, breath work, movement therapies. There's lots of things like trauma yoga. Like I said when I was discussing earlier about my story, I was lifting weights. Thank God I was going to the gym like 7 days a week, to help with some of these emotional uh, trauma, even though at the time I was lifting because I wanted to look good because I was a little chubby and people made fun of me and this and that. So I was kind of doing it to help me physically. Later on, once I was able to heal some of that trauma, the inside, it started to become an inside job and not an outside job. But, some of these things, like, when you're dealing with some of these issues, you don't realize it at the time. Like you have no way of knowing like what's really going on until something happens that triggers you to be like, whoa, I really need to address this. I need to get some help. So hopefully, if you're in this particular situation, hopefully something I say may trigger or help you want to get some help. Okay. Let's see. So trauma as a triad, sorry. So I basically, am a gut person. So my specialty is the gut microbiome. Again, I'm also certified in positive psychology. So I help people with doing comprehensive gut testing and things of that nature because I truly believe that, you need to heal your gut along with your brain. And you also have to have heart health. Like these three things are like really important. You have what's called sensory neurites. that are lined in your intestinal tract. You also have sensory neurites in your heart. People think, oh, everything's coming from my brain, but no. Some thoughts, like when I coach people and help people, I try to explain to them that you have to maybe take a couple of breaths, practice the pause, think about like what would your heart say, right? You know, you probably heard it before. People who have had heart transplants, right? What happens when they get a heart transplant? They start taking on the characteristics of people whose heart uh, that they receive. And that's because of these sensory neurites. You have 40,000 of these things. So your heart has memory. You have to remember this. So your heart, trauma disrupts heart rate variability, increases arrhythmia risk, and fuels emotional imbalance. Your gut, big part of it, alters the microbiome. You have more gut bacteria than you do have cells in your body. Okay. A lot of people learned about the gut microbiome through COVID that, 80% of your 80% of your immune system's in your gut. Well, believe it or not, 90% of your serotonin is produced in your gut. Your gut, the microbiome produces metabolites. It's it's called your enteric nervous system. It's basically connected to your central nervous system. And what's connected to your enteric nervous system is your HPA axis, which is your hypothalamus, your pituitary gland, your adrenals that produce cortisol, that produce all these things. And then you have a blood-brain barrier, like your gut communicates to your brain. So you really want to make sure that you're, taking care of all three things. Trauma dysregulates the stress response, driving PTSD, anxiety, brain fog, all these things. These systems are connected by bidirectional feedback loops, meaning trauma in one system affects the others, creating a cycle that reinforces stress and symptoms. So when you're getting help, right? When you're going to like a therapist, when I work with certain therapists, I say, hey, some people need to be on medications. They might need an SSRI, and I'm not against medications. But while we're taking care of that person for trauma, let's do comprehensive gut testing. Let's make sure they don't have dysbiosis, leaky gut, and we could help, with their gut, heal their gut while we're healing their brain. And while we're healing the heart, let's teach them how to love themselves, forgive themselves, and all these things that I'm going to go into. Okay. So very important that when you're healing trauma, you're not just thinking about, oh, I'm just healing my brain. You're also healing your gut and you're healing your heart. Okay. Different types of trauma. There's acute trauma, results from a single overwhelming event. I'm just checking on time here. Good. And, that could be an accident, assault, natural disaster, often more easily recognized as traumatic. We have chronic trauma that could be exposure to war zones, violence, domestic violence, ongoing abuse, right? There's collective and societal trauma that affects entire communities or cultural groups, oppression, genocide, pandemic, excuse me. And that could be transmitted across generations. Again, some of these things is complex trauma as well. And the chronic trauma occurs during key developments period. Let me just go over complex trauma, and then I'm going to go back to what I was going to say because I don't want to confuse. So complex trauma occurs during key development periods, particularly in caregiving relationships, profoundly shapes identity, formation, and attachment, alters fundamental sense of safety in the world. Again, some of these things, like some of these traumatic experiences or trauma, could be genetic too, as well. Like you could get some of trauma from maybe your parents, from other situations, right? So we want to be mindful of these things, right? We want to be really mindful about what's going on with ourselves. I mean, I've seen some people carry, it might be a little woo-woo to some, but past lives trauma, right? You've seen it. You just can't dismiss it, because there's been, people who have little kids who remember things from past lives. It's pretty crazy. Or one of the things that I remember a story of someone who received a heart, and that person had been murdered, and that person received the heart, and that person actually felt they were able to catch the murderer as a result of that. So there is trauma could be, could come across all different ways, and we have to be open-minded to every single way that trauma could affect someone. Okay. Small T versus big T trauma. So big T trauma, life-threatening events that clearly overwhelm coping capacity, natural disasters, physical or sexual assault, combat exposure, severe accidents, and it's more easily recognized and validated by society. And then you have the small T trauma, which is non-life threatening, right? But deeply distressing experiences, emotional abuse, bullying, betrayal, persistent shame, often minimized but can have profound cumulative impact. And listen, both types deserve acknowledgement and healing. If there's big T trauma or low T trauma, trauma is trauma, okay? And the impact of trauma isn't determined by the objective severity of an event, but by its meaning and effect on the individual's nervous system. Somebody who might have would be traumatizing to them may not be traumatizing to someone else. Some people are more sensitive. Again, I mentioned that I'm a highly sensitive person. Like, I felt everything as a child and still do today. I thought it was like a curse. I used to be like, God, why did you make me this way? Until I was able to heal my trauma and realize, wow, it's the greatest gift I had, that I was given, because I'm a very loving, kind, caring person. I have empathy, and I am able to feel and help other people as a result of it, because I'm intuitive in that way. But prior to that, I didn't understand, like, why do I have to feel everything? And it scared me. So maybe you could identify with that as a man or someone else, because I think more so as a man, I kept that a secret. I was really scared because I didn't want to be called a wussy, or whatever choice names that people would call me based on the fact that I was being bullied all the time. Okay. How trauma manifests in daily life. So there's emotional symptoms, there's cognitive symptoms, there's relational symptoms, and there's behavioral symptoms. So for emotional, you could have mood swings, anxiety, fear, shame, guilt, harsh criticism, self-criticism. Cognitive symptoms, intrusive thoughts, difficulty concentrating, negative beliefs. Relational symptoms, trust issues and fear of vulnerability, people pleasing or conflict. Difficulty establishing boundaries. Behavioral symptoms, avoiding of people, places, and things. Self-protective behaviors, self-soothing, things of that nature. I know for me growing up, I had emotional symptoms of shame and guilt. I probably had one in each category, to be honest with you. It was very difficult, dealing through my teenage years of, using drugs and alcohol, smoking marijuana and drinking alcohol to cover up the pain. And then, having the fear of, like, why don't people like me? Like, always thinking, like, why doesn't that person like me? Based on all the abuse that I had suffered being Jewish and being picked on and being short and, being beat up, through the physical abuse with my mom, just the abandonment. Why don't people like me? Why did they leave me? So, these things were like very hard for me growing up. And how I dealt with it through my teenage years was to smoke pot and drink. Even though during those times while I was still doing that, I was still lifting weights and working out. That was one thing I was very consistent on doing. Okay. Which I'm glad that I continued to do. The often overlooked is development and attachment trauma. Okay. So developmental trauma is what we talked about a little bit earlier. When trauma occurs during critical developmental windows, it shapes how the brain and personality form. This includes childhood emotional neglect, inconsistent or frightening caregiving, early medical trauma or separation, growing up in a chronically unstable environment. So even without the obvious big T traumatic events, these experiences can profoundly impact how we relate to ourselves and others throughout life. And I mentioned, basically between the ages of 0 and 7, we're like a sponge. Okay. So depending on how our parents, spoke to us, what you saw, their attachment patterns, the environment has a huge part of it. So trauma's hidden impact on attachment patterns. So this impacts us in adulthood, because then we subconsciously are choosing certain relationships or in relationships and act in certain ways that really have shaped us but it's due to basically a traumatic thing of what was programmed into our subconscious. And what we're all trying to strive for is having a secure attachment where we're comfortable with both intimacy and independence, able to regulate emotions within relationships. Now, if you saw your parents anxious, preoccupied attachment, you saw fear, abandonment, seeks excessive reassurance, experiences relationships as never enough. You could have seen, a situation where your parents treated you, they were avoidant or dismissive, minimize emotional needs, maintains distance, values self-sufficiency over connection. Disorganized, fearful attachment simultaneously creates fear, closeness, unpredictable responses. These things can really impact you. I know for me, early on in relationships, again, as a man, I was anxious. I was probably, an anxious person. I was worried that people were going to leave me based on the abandonment, the shame that I was carrying around with me. I didn't really learn that until after my divorce in the next relationship that I got, a serious relationship, a 10-year relationship, where I was able to really like learn about how some of these myths of anxious and myths of masculinity had impacted and caused me to be needy. And it was learning through that experience that helped me shed those things and learn to have a secure attachment. But that takes work. Like you have to learn things in order for that to happen. That's not something that just happens overnight. That takes deliberate practice and to be able to shed the old belief and replace it with new beliefs, right? Not the belief that I did something wrong, right? I did something wrong, needed to be replaced with I'm a good person. I'm not doing anything wrong. So these are things that you have to work out when you're going to therapy. It's not just like saying, oh, I'm getting over the trauma. And once you're done with getting over the trauma, there's more work to be done. You need to learn tools that will help you be able to, deal with some of the triggers because when life happens, right? Life is going to throw you curveballs. And those neural pathways that we discussed earlier may be smaller, but they still could be triggered. It's like when I mentioned about changing your password after 2 weeks of doing it, it becomes automatic. But say after 3 weeks, you go out and you have a couple of drinks and you didn't get enough sleep that night. Sometimes you might come in and start typing that old password. It happens. And that could happen with the same things with your triggers because you still have that inner child, right? You have to haven that inner child, learn to practice the pause and say, ooh, that's my inner child, right? That's causing some of these triggers. And we have to like reach into our toolbox to help us go back from an anxious to a secure attachment. Plus, we have to learn how to communicate our feelings, which is something I had to learn as well. So let's move on. So echoes of past trauma and communication styles. This is very important too. So, depending on how your parents and how people spoke to you is going to determine how you are in a relationship and how you treat other people. You could be avoidant, right? You could get into an avoidant pattern. Dismissive or critical childhood communication can lead to difficulty expressing needs, fears, fear, vulnerability, or withdrawal in adult conversations. I know I was very fearful as a man to be able to communicate my feelings and wants and needs because it wasn't something that I learned. Even though I was raised in a lesbian environment, I still got bit by some of these myths of masculinity. And not even that. I really feel that, when it comes to vulnerability transcends both masculine and femininity, okay? We should all strive to be vulnerable. Vulnerability leads you to loving yourself. When you really learn to love yourself, you learn to be vulnerable because you're not worried about what other people think of you. But you could also become anxious, right? Like if somebody's, you could learn this anxious communication style, which is what I had as well, until I had to learn to become secure. I had to learn to become an assertive and have an assertive, healthy pattern. Some people are aggressive, right? Where they just are hostile. They're just always aggressive. And they're quick to anger, aggressive language when feeling threatened in relationships. There's people who are passive, growing up where one's voice was silenced or invalidated. Oh, you shouldn't feel those feelings, things like that. And then that person really tends to become like, people pleasing to avoid conflict. They just don't want to make anybody mad. And then you have passive aggressive, which I think for me was something I had to address as well, because I would let things go until they build up and then I would explode, right? So that's, more of a passive aggressive. And I think it's important, like, if you're experiencing trauma and you're going through trauma, one of the things to really understand, especially because, you want to like really get to a place where you have assertive communication, where you're secure, because that's something that's going to help you, live a flourishing life. But recognizing these patterns is the first step toward consciously rewriting our communication scripts for healthier and more authentic connections. Okay. It's just part of it as well. Okay. This is something I talked about earlier in the beginning about how I was going to have a couple slides on men and trauma. And the reason why I bring this up is because, while trauma affects everyone, men face specific cultural barriers to acknowledging and healing from trauma, which I did, which I just mentioned recently. Even though grew up in a lesbian environment, I still was bit by these bugs of, tough it out, man up. I had a limited emotional vocabulary. Cultural messaging that seeking help indicates failure. I wouldn't ask for help. And this really caused a lot of pain for me up until in my 30s. Like I really didn't address this until, I was 30 in this 10-year relationship with someone who was really instrumental in my life, who helped me learn to not be intimidated by a strong woman who was very successful and who was a nurturer. And I totally had everything like backwards about relationships when it came to this. That, to give you an example, I was a people pleaser. I didn't express my wants and needs out of fear. And it was almost like, I guess I give you an example. And maybe you could identify with this. Like, I always look at like a guy, like some families choose to have, the mom stay home and take care of the kids while the father goes out and is the breadwinner. That's changing a lot today, which is great. And, he could come home on a Friday and his wife could say to him, "Hey, honey," to show appreciation towards him. "Hey, what would you like to do this weekend?" To show appreciation, to show nurturing. And, he could just say, "Oh, whatever you want, honey." Eh, wrong answer, right? Because that basically, and I'm not saying that women also have to learn how to communicate. It's a dance, right? You have to learn how to dance. But you could see where it would go because a man would get confused to say, a man is like saying, "Oh, you have such a great job. You're taking care of the job. We'll do whatever you want." But she's showing appreciation to him for doing all, like taking care of the household, going out and working. And instead of saying something like, "Oh, thank you, honey, I really appreciate that. Yeah, let's do something. I really like to maybe play golf, but let's on Saturday, let's do date night. And then on Sunday, let's all four of us, you, me, and the kids go out and do something together." And that's how things kind of deteriorate because after a while, because he doesn't get it, what she's trying to do. Basically, she starts to say, all right, I'm going to stop. I mean, I don't, it is what it is. And she doesn't communicate it. And then later on, he doesn't feel appreciated. And that's where the miscommunication comes in. And that's kind of what I was kind of taught. And I was like, whoa, I needed to change like this way of thinking that I had as a man and learn how to communicate my feelings and ask questions, most importantly, ask questions and learn to listen. And so I think it's more difficult for men to be able to do that because women are more expressive. And it is like the mask of masculinity in a way. Again, like I had a mask on for a long time. And the suicide rate, men die by suicide at a 3.8 times the rate of women in the US, and many cases linked to unaddressed trauma and emotional pain. Men need to be able to feel safe in order to, but it's hard because, again, we have the stigma of if we say something, we're wussies, right? Substance abuse is increasing. Sub 70% is men account for approximately 70% of substance abuse treatment admissions, often using substances to manage trauma symptoms. 1 in 6 sexual abuse. At least 1 in 6 men have experienced sexual abuse or assault, yet these experiences are vastly underreported and undertreated. And these statistics reflect not inherent gender differences in trauma vulnerability, but the tragic consequences of cultural barriers that prevent men from acknowledging and healing emotional wounds. So if you're a man on this call and you are dealing with some type of, okay, I'm really afraid to express my feelings, please reach out to me after the call. I'll give you information on how to do so. And I'll talk a little bit more about my story and see how we can help, because you don't have to suffer. And again, we were never given a playbook. Nobody was given a playbook, neither men or women, on how to really communicate effectively, unless you were raised in some type of great environment. But listen, for men mostly, when it comes to expressing our feelings, we never were given the playbook. So yeah, I could identify. I've been there. I understand. It took for me, just to share, like when I was 22, that's when I addressed a lot of my issues. Like from 1992 to 1996, I graduated from school. I went to technical school, and I got certifications in computer repair and robotics. Up until that time, I still was dealing, I wasn't smoking pot anymore, and I was drinking, on the weekends, but I decided to join the Air Force at 22. Little did I know it was more of a geographical quirk, because I still had these insecurities. I still had these things, abandonment issues that I hadn't addressed, okay? And the shame and all those things. And when I was 22, when I went into the Air Force, after 3 weeks, I was let go because they said I had asthma and I was going to go to officer training school. Like, I went in with higher education. And when I came back, that's when I really hit bottom. And that's when I really decided I need to get help. And, I was always the type of person in my teenage years. I was always interested in psychology and things. I didn't mention this part, but at the age of 14, I'm reading books on Deepak Chopra. I'm also watching, I don't know how old you are on this, if different people are at different ages, but I would watch Wayne Dyer on PBS. I'd watch his specials, and I bought the cassette tapes for Tony Robbins. So I was always interested in bettering myself to try and find out what was going on, but I really didn't get the help that I need. I hadn't gone to therapy. I might have went, my mom tried to get me to go to therapy here and there, but really didn't do it. And when I came home, I started drinking a lot. And that's when I got on my hands and knees and I prayed to God and I said, God, why'd you make me this way? I really can't, I don't really understand why I'm here, why you made me this way. I need help. And I went to bed that night and I had a dream, and my grandparents had already passed. A very vivid, lucid dream. And they came to me on a train and they told me my soul's been enriched and that they love me and that everything is going to be okay. The next day I woke up, I knew two people who were in AA, Alcoholics Anonymous. And I wasn't an alcoholic. I just needed help. And I went to AA. So from 1992 to 1996, and I had mentioned earlier in the story that my dad he moved to Florida, so he really wasn't part of my life. From 1992 to 1996, I followed the 12-step program. And at the same time, I went to Jewish Family Services and I used CBT, cognitive-based therapist, to actually help me deal and address the trauma. And at that time, I was able to talk to my mother, address her, why she did the things she did. My aunt and uncle came back into my life who had abandoned us because my mom was gay, addressed that, was able to address, the things with my dad. I started to write things, at the age of 22 called The 9 Ingredients of Love, to love myself. And I'll go over that in the slide later on. But just to give you some context, why I said I kind of have a degree in trauma, between 1992 and 1996, 4 years, even though I was supposed to spend 4 years in the Air Force, I spent 4 years working on myself and healing my trauma. So this isn't something that, you just take care of overnight. Like, this takes work. It takes work, but I'm going to show you some slides that will tell you the result if you do, okay? Which I hope you do. So breaking through the silence, why talking about the trauma matters, okay? You want to talk about your trauma. The power of sharing reduces isolation. It validates experiences, externalizes emotions, gains perspective. Like this is really important. Like you want to talk about this, okay? Navigating disclosure challenges. Basically, you have fear of rejection, okay, re-traumatization, difficulty finding words, social stigma. It's crucial to choose a safe, supportive environment when you're doing this. And research shows that suppressing traumatic experiences keeps the brain, like we talked about earlier, in high alert. It perpetuates hypo and hyper arousal, okay? And this will constantly cause a lot of problems: health, chronic fatigue, physical stress, HRV problems. It could cause you to get cancer. People, I asked in the beginning, how many people are having backaches, stomach problems? People are raising their hands, putting things in the chat. Yeah, I mean, this is serious stuff. Your body keeps the score. So you have to break the silence. Why talking about trauma matters, okay? Very important. So this is key too, the window of tolerance, key to trauma healing. You have on one side the arousal zone and the hypoarousal zone. Trauma healing involves gradually expanding your window of tolerance and developing skills to return to it when dysregulated. Again, these things in life could trigger and cause you to think about, old patterns. But once you learn new things, you don't unlearn them. So it's easy to basically get yourself back on the wagon, all right? So if you're in a hyper arousal zone, you're in fight or flight activation, anxiety, anger, panic, racing thoughts, muscle tension, feeling overwhelmed, right? You could also be in a hypoarousal, freeze or collapse response, numbness, emptiness, brain fog, disassociation, exhaustion, depression, disconnection from body. The window of tolerance is where you want to be, where that I consider is your tool chest, where you have emotional balance, present moment awareness, rational thinking, can connect with others, right? New learning, possibly, new learning possibilities, basically. Um, Marcia, I'm going to answer questions at the end. So if you have a question, if anybody has a question, please put it in the chat and I will basically answer it at the end. Okay. When I open it up for questions and answers, I'm trying to go through this as quickly as I can. So thank you. So the path to healing, a holistic framework. So there's cognitive, emotional, spiritual, relational, and somatic. Like we have to address these different things, which involve your heart, brain, okay, and your gut, okay. Effective trauma healing addresses all these dimensions. Through the emphasis may vary based on individual needs and preferences. So for cognitive, you're addressing trauma-related beliefs, thought patterns, and creating new meaning. Emotional, safely experiencing, expressing, and integrating difficult emotions. Somatic, we want to learn how to, heal our bodies, move that energy through there so we don't store this energy, which causes us to have pain. Relational, rebuilding trust, communication skills, and healthy attachment patterns. And spirituality, finding purpose, connection, growth through the healing journey. Okay. So we want to make this a holistic journey. There's other things that you could use, such as besides therapy, you could use energy work, Reiki. You could use, excuse me, I have a cold, so I apologize. Let me take a little sip of a drink. There's different things that you could do for a holistic approach, such as aromatherapy, Reiki, hypnotherapy, a lot of different things. Sorry, I might have to take another drink. All right. So the important thing first, though, is safety first, the foundation of trauma recovery. And that's what we talked about before. We want to establish safety. So really, that encompasses four different things: physical safety, emotional safety, environmental safety, and internal safety. For trauma survivors whose nervous systems are often overwired, or often hardwired for threat, creating these forms. Sorry, guys, I'm still letting people in, so I apologize. Creating these forms of safety is a primary goal. This process gradually retrains the brain body to understand that the danger has passed. So really, we want to develop an internal locus of control. It's empowering individuals to respond to stress rather than merely reacting from ingrained fear, right? A lot of this has to do with a lot of shame, a lot of fear, guilt, a lot of different things. Okay. So we want to create a safe space and foundation for trauma recovery. So here's some key evidence-based approaches for healing trauma. Okay. So if you're someone who hasn't dealt with your trauma and you're looking for some ways to do that, there's different approaches. So there's cognitive behavioral approaches such as CBT, DBT, and ACT, which address thoughts patterns, emotional regulation. Okay, that could be very helpful. I'm more in the CBT camp. There's body-centered approaches, which include somatic experiencing, EMDR, trauma-sensitive yoga, releases trauma in the body, relational approaches, including IFS, Turner Family Systems, attachment focused therapy, group support. So, these heal fragmented aspects of self, build secure attachments. And then, there's other things like ketamine assisted therapy as well, have been very successful. Also, psilocybin, which actually the only place that it's legal in the United States is in Colorado. No, I think it's Washington, uh, or is it Oregon? I think it's Oregon. I'm not sure. It's either Oregon or Washington. But I do know I've had other speakers on here because I have guest speakers who come on, and one of them is somebody who deals with psilocybin, and I believe she's in Oregon. And if you're interested in that type of treatment, psilocybin, let me know and I could hook you up with her as well. So these are just some things that you could use. And most effective trauma treatment combines elements from multiple approaches tailored to individual needs. Now, the thing is that I really want to emphasize is that when you deal with a therapist, you have to shop around to find someone who actually is really good, who you connect with. And the thing that I really want to emphasize is when I was finished, remember I mentioned that I healed my trauma between 1992 and 1996, and I'm 26 years old. When I was finished, there was nothing else that was taught to me. Like nobody taught me about what a habit is. Nobody taught me about cognitive based therapy, how to be my own cognitive based therapy, real-time resilience skills, thinking traps, what is a habit, growth versus fixed mindset, all the different things that I teach via positive psychology. I know that if I would have learned these things, it would have really helped me make some really important decisions, different decisions, when I turned 30, which when you really make some important decisions, where do I want to live? Do I want to get married? Do I want to have children? Maybe change careers. So it's important that when you heal trauma, the work does not stop, right? You have to build your tool chest and learn different things. So in combination of also healing the trauma, you also want to build your tool chest up to have tools to find purpose in your life, okay? And be able to bounce back from adversity quickly. So it's important to find somebody who's going to help you do that, okay? And teach you skills. Post-traumatic growth. This is where we're going to go into like what happens once you're done, when you're dealing with your trauma and you're successfully navigating out of it, where you're finding meaning beyond survival. And post-traumatic growth is a profound positive transformation that can emerge from struggle from trauma, okay? Which is great. And research shows it often includes greater appreciation for life, changed priorities, warmer, more intimate relationships, heightened sense of self, of personal growth, recognize of new possibilities of past spiritual development, or a deeper sense of self. That doesn't mean trauma was worth it, okay? I want to make this very clear or happened for a reason, okay? It's not like, okay, you went on an airplane and one person who was destined to die, you went down with the plane because that one person, right? It happened for a reason. No. It's just rather that humans have remarkable capacity to create meaning from suffering. Okay. So how you go into this is basically the meaning, or how you come out of it is the meaning that you're going to make. I kind of started off this whole presentation where I said I had to make the meaning for me, that when I connected the dots and saw that, I was born into a lesbian relationship. My dad basically had abandoned me. I had stomach issues I had to deal with. I didn't mention that I was born with some stomach issues. I had surgeries on my stomach, and I connected the dots. For me, that's how I made meaning and why I do this work, why I got into the microbiome, why I was able to heal my gut without going to traditional gastroenterologists and having medications thrown at me, why I was able to go into positive psychology and learn these different things. Like this was my purpose. So, like, if one of the things I want to tell you through post-traumatic growth, if you are brave enough to go through it, you're going to come out on the other side and you're going to find the purpose for your life because you were born to do something great with your life. You have to remember that. And not only if you're living in trauma, does it affect you, you got to understand that it affects everybody around you. If you think it doesn't, you have to really start paying attention because we're energetic beings. The energy we give off, we feel that from other people. So if you're dealing with trauma, it has a direct impact. So why not break the cycle? I wanted to break the cycle. So with my children, they can learn all these things so that this will never be repeated again. That's what you, so it's not just about you, it's about your family as well and the people who you love. You got to do it for you, and you're doing it for the people who you love as well. Okay. So practical tools, grounding techniques. You could do some breathing exercises as well. You could do temperature changes. These are things that can help with the vagus nerve stimulation. So when I was having panic attacks earlier on in my 20s, before I went on, I even went on an SSRI to help me get through some of the traumatic experiences that I had to deal with. And then slowly I was able to wean off of that. I would take ice cubes and put it on my neck to basically help stimulate the vagus nerves. So that way I would get rid of like those panicky feelings. I would do box breathing. You could do other breathing like 4, 6, 7, where you breathe in through your nose for the count of 4, hold it for a count of 6, breathe out your mouth for a count of 7 or 8. Your out breath is more than your intake because that activates your parasympathetic nervous system. And practicing these regularly when calm to build the new neural pathways that make them more effective during distress. Okay. So again, these are just some grounding techniques that you could do. Self-compassion, the healing superpower. I don't know if you heard of Dr. Christine Neff. Shows self-compassion is one of the most powerful factors in trauma recovery. It involves mindfulness, common humanity, and self-kindness. So for trauma survivors, self-compassion directly counteracts the shame, the self-blame, the harsh and self-criticism that often accompany trauma. For me, I had a lot of shame. One of the movies that really stand out for me is the movie Good Will Hunting. I don't know if you've ever saw that movie, Good Will Hunting, but I can remember the scene where Robin Williams had told, I forgot his name, Matt Damon, that's the actor, it's not your fault. It wasn't your fault. It wasn't your fault. And he was like, stop it, stop it. And then he started crying. He was able to release and realize that it wasn't his fault, right? I still get choked up like thinking about that because, those wounds will always be there. Okay. Just to say, like, oh, when you heal trauma, that, those wounds go away and you never feel them again. No, those wounds are there. They'll always be there. But, at some point you have to say, ooh, how can I turn those wounds into like a strength? Like, if a certain situation comes up in your life presently after you've dealt with trauma, you could use that wound to be like, wow, if I got through that, I could get through this. I could get through anything. So, one way of actually helping, use the wound to be able to help you deal with future conflicts or things that go on in your life. But still, it's always there. And sometimes you're going to feel it. But once you learn to build your tool chest up, you're able to deal with it a lot better and bounce back quicker. Okay. Self-forgiveness is the key here. Unlocking true healing for trauma survivors, holding on to self-blame or guilt can be a significant barrier to healing. Self-forgiveness is a profound act of compassion, allowing you to release this burden. So you want to release the burden. Self-forgiveness is for you, means freeing yourself from the shame and guilt you have internalized. It's not about condoning harm. Let's be clear about that. But it's about letting go of what binds you, giving power to it. Like if you're giving power to something that has happened that you have no control over and you're getting stuck in that, that's hurting you. The person or place or thing It's not even thinking about it. You're holding on to it and you're never going to be free. You're never going to live a flourishing life. So at some point, you have to make a decision to do so. And that's really what it takes, a decision. Okay. Embrace imperfection. Recognizing your reactions to trauma were often survival responses, not personal failings. Okay. Difference between growth and first fixed mindset. With a fixed mindset, you're full of fear. You're never going to try new things. A growth mindset, you try new things, you fail, you label that as a failure, but you don't label yourself as a failure. Same thing here. Acceptance paves the way for growth. And you want to reclaim your power. By forgiving yourself, you reclaim agency over your narrative and emotional state, moving from a place of self-condemnation to one of liberation and resilience. And that's what I had to do. Like when I first basically was dealing something when I was 22, one of the first things I did was I created what love meant for me. Okay. So I created what's called the 9 ingredients of love. Okay. And I got it copyrighted. And when I created the 9 ingredients of love, I hung them on my refrigerator and I read them morning, noon, and night. So building strong, healthy relationships after trauma requires cultivating specific qualities within ourselves, right? First, and others. These ingredients foster trust, understanding, and deeper connection. So what you're seeing here were my 9 ingredients of love, are my 9 ingredients of love, and what love means for me. And so I read them morning, noon, and night, and was able to slowly, change the belief that I'm not good enough to I'm a loving, caring being. I am love, right? That's how I see myself now, is that I am love. Before, I was unworthy. I didn't deserve it, right? But by reading these, I was able to move them from my head to my heart, right? And then once I was able to move them from my head to my heart, truly love myself, then I was able to give that out to others. So cultivating these qualities within yourself and seeking them in others can significantly enhance your relational healing journey. Other things that if you do address your trauma, embracing self-love, key qualities. Self-love is the foundational element for healthy relationships with yourself and the world. It's not about ego, but a deep respect and appreciation for who you are. Individuals who embody self-love often demonstrate these qualities. Forgiveness. You extend forgiveness to yourself and others, regardless of an apology. Optimism, resilience, self-sufficiency, internal validation, self-trust in adversity, authenticity in relationships, boundary setting, which is really important, non-personalization, non-comparison, growth mindset, discernment. You understand the crucial difference between giving up and truly letting go. That's a big one. Okay. Humor and limitless potential. When you look in the mirror, you see you're capable of so much more. And fear of the unknown doesn't exist. I remember when I was going through all my adversities as a teenager, I must have did it 100 times. After like I went and partied too much, I woke up the next morning and I was ashamed of myself. I'd look in the mirror and say, "You're capable of so much more. You're capable of so much more." I knew I was capable of so much more. I just was afraid to basically go and address these things until I got beaten down enough to be able to do it. And now, like, as a result of that, I'm all these things. Like, I feel all these things. I am free. A burden's been lifted off of my shoulders, and I'm living a flourishing life. And the beauty of it is I'm giving it away to you, right? So you deserve to live a life that's not just surviving, but thriving. Okay. Building healthy relationships after trauma, right? You want to build healthy relationships. You want to practice the boundaries. You want to recognize patterns. Again, just because you've healed the trauma, you have these these tools that you need to build, such as learning about self-centered fear, unrealistic expectations, perfectionisms, how those are in your life, learning to love yourself, gratitude. You also want to learn about living in the moment, which is really important. Like there's so many things that is important to learn in order for you to live a flourishing life. So they'll help you recognize these patterns. How do I become my own cognitive-based therapist? When a crazy thought comes into my head, what is the evidence for and what is the evidence against that thought? Using real-time resilience skills. Like these are things that we need to learn once we've dealt with trauma, okay? You want to choose safe people, surround yourself with people who respect your boundaries, and you want to build communication skills. We want to be able to get to a place where we love ourselves so much, we don't care about what other people think, we're vulnerable, and we're able to have boundaries and be able to communicate our feelings, wants, and needs. Okay, very important. Resources for continued learning and support. There's different books that you could read, which Body Keeps the Score by, we talked about Bessel van der Kolk. It Didn't Start With You by Mark Wolin. Healing the Fragmented Selves of Trauma Survivors by Janina Fisher. And What Happened to You by Bruce Perry and Oprah Winfrey. Oprah Winfrey wrote a book. There's different organizations, National Center for PTSD, Trauma Resource Institute, the International Society for Traumatic Stress Studies, different support options, individual therapy with trauma-informed therapists, trauma recovery groups, there's podcasts, there's a lot of different things that you could take advantage of. There's a crisis text line, text home, and let's hope you never would have to use this National Suicide Prevention Lifeline, okay? Please, if you're at that point, after this meeting, please just contact me. I'll give you my information, okay? And your healing journey, key takeaways. Trauma is both universal and unique. Your experience and reactions are valid regardless of how they compare to others. There is no hierarchy of suffering, okay? That's where you need to understand. Everybody suffers. You're not unique. Everybody goes through these things. What's going to make you unique is that you're going to be the person who's going to actually speak up and get some help. Healing is possible at any age. The brain remains plastic throughout life. Like I said, through neuroplasticity, new experiences, relationships, and skills can rewire trauma patterns even after decades. Okay, so really important. The journey is non-linear. Healing isn't a straight line, but a spiral. Revisiting old territory with new resources and awareness is progress, not failure. And connection is medicine. So make sure you connect, okay? We are wounded in relationship and healed in relationships. And the greatest gift you could give yourself is becoming aware that you have the power to rewrite your story. Please, no matter what has happened to you, your capacity for healing is limitless. Okay. So I want to thank you for joining us. I really appreciate it. I hope this journey through understanding trauma and the path to healing has provided you with valuable insight and tools. Remember, healing is a continuous process, and you have the strength within you to rewrite your story. I love this anonymous quote. I don't know who wrote it, but if you always do what you've always done, you'll always get what you've always gotten. So when you're looking in your mirror tomorrow morning or tonight, when you're brushing your teeth, you have to ask yourself, is there certain things that I need to change? Is there certain things that I need to address? Because it's time for you to embrace new approach, seek support, and continue to grow. My website is at Heal Hub Advisors, but as you know, I have the meetup group for Heal Hub Advisors. And please, whatever you need, please reach out to me, okay? So thank you so much. I'm gonna stop that. I'm gonna stop the share, and I'm gonna stop the recording. Where's the recording? Very good.